100 Ways to Motivate Yourself, Part 4. 76. Lighten things up. Sunlight and laughter. That's what cures most fears and worries. Terrifying problems are better solved in the light than in the dark. And there are many ways to bring them into the light. Pick a frightening problem. Then do the following. Talk about it with someone, draw an illustrated map of it on a huge piece of paper, make top 10 lists about the problem, tell yourself some jokes about the problem, sing about the problem, and, finally, dance a dance that expresses the problem. If you do all these things, I promise you that your problem will seem a lot funnier and less frightening than it once did. It is impossible to laugh deeply and be frightened at the same time. G.K. Chesterton used to say that taking things lightly was the most spiritually advanced thing you could do to improve your effectiveness in life. After all, said Chesterton, it's because God's angels take themselves so lightly that they are able to fly. And if his angels take themselves that lightly, imagine how much more lightly he takes himself. My friend Fred Knipe is a 3-time Emmy Award-winning television writer who also performs as a comedian in the character of Dr. M.F. Ludiker, world expert on everything. Fred is one of the funniest human beings I have ever known. He never fails to lighten me up, no matter how big the problem I have. Dr. Ludiker mounts the stage and puts his ludicrous Ludiker Institute logo in front of the podium, a logo that features a cartoon human brain hanging between two electrical towers. He then proceeds to give, in a mild Teutonic accent, his advice from hell. With the increase in domestic violence, the doctor says, I am advocating that home appliance manufacturers begin installing airbags. On the subject of our growing intolerance of crime, he says, criminals, among the most deeply tense in our communities, will soon have trouble recruiting top people because they can no longer escape the sense that there is resentment building about what they do for a living. It was inevitable, he observes, that genetic engineering would come from a generation that played Mr. Potato Head. Knipe's editing of my writing also causes me to lighten up. While making helpful handwritten notes on the manuscript for this book, he recommended that I refer to the Lakota shaman lame deer as Super Shaman Lame Deer. While going through my recovery from a frightening disease that featured, at one point, uncontrolled bleeding, he left me a comforting phone message that said, don't worry about the bleeding. It's normal for someone your age. Fred shares my long-held belief that humor is the highest form of creativity. It's the hardest to produce and the most enjoyable to receive. Humor, like all other creativity, is a matter of making unusual combinations. The more surprising the combination, the funnier the humor. Your own motivational level will always be lifted by humor. Anytime you are stuck, ask yourself to take things lightly. Ask yourself to come up with some funny solutions. Laughter will destroy all limits to your thinking. When you are laughing, you are open to anything. 77. Serve and grow rich. One good way to motivate yourself is by increasing the flow of money into your life. Most people are embarrassed to even think this way. They don't want to think and grow rich because they think they will be thought of as selfish or greedy. Or maybe they still believe in the thoroughly discredited Marxist economic superstition that to make money, you have to take it away from somebody else. Or else they don't want to come across as being obsessed with money. But do you know who is really obsessed with money? People who don't have any. They obsess about money all day long. It's in their family discussions, it's in their minds at night, and it becomes a destructive part of their relationships during the day. The best way not to be obsessed with money is to trust your game plan for earning your way to financial freedom. Our first duty, said George Bernard Shaw, is not to be poor. The road to not being poor always travels through your professional relationships in life. The more you serve those relationships, the more productive those relationships will become, and the more money you will make. Money is life energy that we exchange and use as a result of the service we provide to the universe, wrote Deepak Chopra in Creating Affluence. When you understand that money flows from service, you have a chance to understand something even more valuable. Unexpectedly large amounts of money come from unexpectedly large degrees of service. The way to generate unexpected service to the people in your life is to ask yourself, what do they expect? Once you're clear on what that is, then ask, what can I do that they would not expect? It's always the unexpected service that gets talked about. And it's always getting talked about that increases your professional value. As Napoleon Hill repeatedly pointed out, great wealth comes from the habit of going the extra mile. And it is always a smart business move to do a little more than you are paid for. It is almost impossible to enjoy a life of self-motivation when you're worried about money. Don't be embarrassed about giving this subject a great deal of thought. Thinking about money a little bit in advance frees you from having to always think about it later. Allow yourself to link financial well-being with an increased capacity for compassion for others. If I am living in poverty, how much love and attention can I give to my children or my fellow humans? How much help can I be if I, for sheer lack of creative planning, am always worried about being in debt? Poverty is no disgrace, said Napoleon Hill. But it is certainly not a recommendation. 78. Make a list of your life. Never hesitate to sit down with yourself and make lists. The more you write things down, the more you can dictate your own future. There is an unfortunate myth that lists make things trivial. But lists do the opposite, they make things come alive. I have a friend who made a list of all the positive things about himself that he could think of. He listed every characteristic and accomplishment that he could remember in his life that he was proud of. He keeps the list in his briefcase, and says he often reads through it when he's feeling down. By seeing all those things written down, and letting myself read them one at a time, I can change my entire attitude from being discouraged to feeling positive about myself, he says. Writing lists of goals and objectives is also a powerful self-motivator. It's one thing to go into a meeting mentally briefed on what you want to accomplish, but you'll feel even stronger having written it out. There is something about writing something down that makes it more real to the right side of your brain. My friend Fred Knight sometimes travels to Phoenix to spend a day talking with me. We've been close friends since college and share an unorthodox sense of humor. Our meetings together are anything but structured. We free associate and talk about everything under the sun. Yet, I notice that he'll often arrive with a list. In the days prior to our meeting, he'll jot down subjects he wants to be sure he remembers to talk to me about while we are together. And it's because our conversations are so freeform that the list is valuable for him. He doesn't ever have to call me back the next day and try to discuss something over the phone that would have been much better discussed in person. If you've ever tried grocery shopping for a large event without a shopping list, you are aware of the nightmare it can be. Most people have learned not to shop that way. I've learned by hard experience that it can mean additional trips to the store to pick up forgotten items. Yet why is it that people don't apply that same principle to their lives? Most people take more time planning a picnic than they do planning a life. Because they know that if they don't make a list and forget the hot dog buns as a result, they are going to be called an idiot by someone. But isn't a life as important as a picnic? Start by listing all the things you would like to do before you die. Keep the list somewhere handy, where you can look at it and add to it. Then list the people in your life you want to remain close to and stay in touch with. Friendship is so precious, why let it be forgotten? It sounds silly to make a list of your friends, but you'll be surprised at how it reminds you who's important and motivates you to stay in touch. My friend Terry Hill, the writer, is one of the greatest list makers of all time. He has a list of every book he has ever read, every poem he's read, and many more things I don't even know about. It gives his life a sense of history, depth, and direction. We don't have to wait to become famous so that someone else might write our history. We can be writing our history while it happens. And when we list our goals, we're writing our history before it happens. When legendary advertising executive David Ogilvy started his advertising agency by making a list of the clients that he most wanted. General Foods, Lever Brothers, Bristol-Myers, Campbell Soup Company, and Shell Oil. At the time, they were the biggest advertising accounts in the world, and he had none of them. But in a sense, he did have them, because they were in his list. It took time, said Ogilvy, but in due course I got them all. A goal gains power when you write it down, and more power every time you write it down. What motivates you most in life ought to be in your own handwriting. People all too often look for motivation in what others have written. If you become a good list maker, you will learn how to motivate yourself by what you've written. 79. Set a specific power goal. Most people are surprised to learn that the reason they're not getting what they want in life is because their goals are too small and too vague, and therefore have no power. Your goals will never be reached if they fail to excite your imagination. What really excites the imagination is the setting of a large and specific power goal. Usually, a goal is just a goal. But a power goal is a goal that takes on a huge reality. It lives and breathes. It provides motivational energy. It gets you up in the morning. You can taste it, smell it, and feel it. You've got it clearly pictured in your mind. You've got it written down. And you love writing it down because every time you do it fills you with clarity of purpose. In his audiotape series, Visioneering, my old partner Dennis Deaton teaches the transforming power of lofty goals. Deaton talks about creating a mental movie that you watch as often as possible. He urges you to make it a movie that stars you living the results of achieving your specific goal. Walt Disney left us many great things: Disneyland, Walt Disney World, great animated films, and Annette Funicello. But what I believe was his greatest gift was the summing up he did of his life's work. If you can dream it, he said, you can do it. A power goal is a dream with a deadline. The deadline itself motivates you. People who have created power goals start living on purpose. They know what they're up to in life. How can you tell if you've got a big enough and real enough power goal? Simply observe the effect your goal has on you. It's not what a goal is that matters, it's what a goal does. 80. Change yourself first. Don't change other people. It doesn't work. You'll waste your life trying. Many of us spend all our time trying to change the people in our lives. We think we can change them in ways that will make them better equipped to make us happy. This is especially true of our children. We talk to our children for hours about how we think they should change. But children don't learn from what we say. They learn from what we do. Today's children, upon hearing us talk to them about how they should change, will often say, "Yeah, right. I think they got this phrase from Bart Simpson. It's shorthand for, I'm not listening to what you say, I'm listening to what you do." Gandhi was especially tuned into the futility of changing other people. Yet Gandhi was probably responsible for more change in people than any other person in our era was. How did he do it? He had a profoundly simple formula. People would often come to Gandhi to ask how they could change others. Someone would say, "I agree with you about nonviolence, but there are others who don't. How do I change them?" And Gandhi told them they couldn't. He said you couldn't change other people. "You must be the change you wish to see in others," said Gandhi. In my own seminars, I probably used that one quotation more than any other. I am always asked, "How can I change my husband?" Or, "How can I change my wife?" Or, "How can I change my teenager?" People who take the seminars on self-motivation at some point during the workshop agree completely with the principles and ideas. Then, they start to think about the people who don't buy in. In the question and answer period, their questions are about those poor people. How do we change them? I always quote Gandhi, "Be the change you wish to see in others." By being what you want them to be, you lead by inspiration. Nobody really wants to be taught by lectures and advice. They want to be led through inspiration. Sales managers often ask me how they can get a certain salesperson to do more self-motivated activities. I tell them that they have to be the salesperson they want to see. Take them on a call, I say, and let them watch you. Don't tell them how to do it, inspire them to do it. I once attended a concert given by my daughter's 4th grade chorus, which sang a song called "Let There Be Peace on Earth." The song's words went, "Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me." I beamed when I heard it. It was such a beautiful expression of being the change, a celebration of self-responsibility that rarely is portrayed in young people's lives today. What you tell people to do often goes right by them. Who you are does not. 81. Pin your life down. Car dealer extraordinaire Henry Brown once told me a story about his son, a high school wrestler. His boy had been getting only fair results as a wrestler that year, and when Henry talked to him about it, he learned the reason. Henry's son entered each wrestling match more than thoroughly prepared to counter anything his opponent tried. But no matter how gifted Henry's son was at countering moves, countering was still countering, so the other wrestler always dictated the tempo. Finally, Henry suggested to his son that he try entering a wrestling match with his own attack plan, a series of moves that he would initiate no matter what his opponent tried. The boy agreed, and the results were remarkable. He began winning match after match, pinning opponent after opponent. The young wrestler's goal had always been to win. He didn't have a problem setting goals, but what had to be added was a plan of action. In sports, as in life, goals alone aren't always enough. As Nathaniel Branden says, a goal without an action plan is a daydream. Henry Brown didn't just give that advice to his son because he bought into it theoretically. His own Brown & Brown Chevrolet dealership has many times been the #1 Chevy dealership in the nation because he plans his company's own yearly performance in the same way he coached his son. Every year, he has his general manager send me the detailed videotape that outlines the dealership's game plan for the coming year. It includes all the department's projected earnings down to the penny. By boldly charting such a specific course, Brown lets the market respond to him. Once, when I asked him how his dealership got through a previous year's nationwide automotive sales recession, he said, "We decided not to participate in it. Before any adventure, take time to plan. Design your own plan of attack. Don't just counter what some other wrestler is doing. Let life respond to you. If you're making all the first moves, you'll be surprised at how often you can pin life down." 82. Take no for a question. Don't take no for an answer. Take it for a question. Make the word no mean this question. Can't you be more creative than that? In my seminars, I work with a lot of salespeople, and one of the most requested topics of discussion is cold calling and rejection. One of the greatest problems salespeople, and people everywhere, face is in the meaning they give to someone else's no. Many people hear no as an absolute, final, and devastating personal rejection. But no can mean anything you want it to mean. When I graduated from college with a degree in English, I was not overwhelmed with companies trying to hire me. Most people already speak English. So I decided to try to get a job as a sports writer at the daily evening paper in Tucson, Arizona, the Tucson Citizen. I had spent 4 years in the Army, and I hadn't done any sports writing since high school. When I applied for the job, I was told that my major problem was that I had never done any professional sports writing before. It was the typical situation of a company not being able to hire you because you haven't had experience, but how can you gain experience if no one will hire you? My first impulse was to take no to be their final answer. After all, that's what they said it was. But I finally decided to have no mean, can't you be more creative than that? So I went home to think and plot my next move. The reason they wouldn't hire me was because I had no experience. When I asked them why that was important, they smiled and said, "We have no way of knowing for sure whether you can write sports. Just being an English major isn't enough." Then it hit me. Their real problem wasn't my lack of experience, it was their lack of knowledge. They didn't know whether I could write well enough. So I set out to solve their problem for them. I began to write them letters. I knew they were interviewing for other people for the position and that they would decide within a month. Every day I wrote a letter to the sports editor, the late Regis Macaulay, an award-winning writer in his own right, who made his reputation in Cleveland before coming to Tucson. My letters were long and expressive. I made them as creative and clever as I could, commenting on the sports news of the day, and letting them know how great a fit I thought I was for their staff. After a month, Mr. Macaulay called me and said that they had narrowed it down to 2 candidates, and I was one of them. Would I come in for a final interview? I was so excited, I nearly swallowed the phone. When my interview was coming to an end, I was the second one in. Macaulay had one last question for me. "Let me ask you something, Steve," he said. "If we hire you, will you promise that you'll stop sending me those endless letters?" I said I would stop, and then he laughed and said, "Then you're hired. You can start Monday." Macaulay later told me that the letters did the trick. "First of all, they showed me that you could write," he said. "And second of all, they proved to me that you wanted the position more than the other candidates did. When you ask for something in professional life and it is denied to you, imagine that the no you heard is really a question. Can't you be more creative than that? Never accept no at face value. Let rejection motivate you to get more creative." 83. Take the road to somewhere. Energy comes from purpose. If the left side of your brain tells the right side of your brain that there's a sufficient crisis, the right side sends you energy, sometimes superhuman energy. That's why there's such a difference between people who set and achieve goals all day, and people who just do whatever comes up, or whatever they feel like doing. To one person, there is always added purpose. To the other, there is boredom and confusion, the 2 greatest robbers of energy. Knowing what you're up to, and why you're up to it, gives you the energy to self-motivate. Not knowing your purpose drains you of all motivation. We've all heard the stories of the diminutive mother who, seeing that her small child was trapped, lifted a tremendously heavy object, such as a car, so the child could be freed. When asked to repeat the superhuman feat later, of course the woman couldn't do it. Being a single father has put me in touch with the dramatic connection between purpose and energy. If I am cooking something, for example, and out of the corner of my eye I can see flames emerging from the kitchen, it is amazing how fast I can move from the living room into the kitchen. Crisis creates instant purpose, which creates instant energy. The "he ain't heavy, he's my brother" idea is based on purpose. When our purpose is great, so is our strength and energy. But I don't know what my purpose is, a lot of people tell me, as if someone forgot to tell them what it is. Those people may wait forever to be told how to live and what to live for. There can only be 2 reasons why you don't know your purpose. 1, you don't talk to yourself, and 2, you don't know where purpose comes from. You think purpose comes from outside yourself instead of from within. Purposeful people know how to go deep into their own spirit and talk to themselves about why they exist and what they want to do with the gift of life. Only human beings have come to a point where they no longer know why they exist, said the Lakota shaman Lame Deer. They don't use their brains and they have forgotten the secret knowledge of their bodies, their senses, or their dreams. Lame Deer is not optimistic about what the future holds for people who live without purpose. They don't use the knowledge the Spirit has put into every one of them, he says. They are not even aware of this, and so they stumble along blindly on the road to nowhere, a paved highway that they themselves bulldoze and make smooth so that they can get faster to the big empty hole that they'll find at the end, waiting to swallow them up. It's a quick, comfortable superhighway, but I know where it leads. I've seen it. I've been there in my vision, and it makes me shudder to think about it. Purpose can be built, strengthened, and made more inspiring every day. We are totally responsible for our own sense of purpose. We can go inside our own spirit and create it, or not. The energy of our lives is wholly dependent on how much purpose we're willing to create. 84. Go on a news fast. I first heard the phrase news fast from Dr. Andrew Weil, who writes about natural medicine and spontaneous healing. Weil recommends going on news fasts because he believes this has a healing effect on the human system. To him, it's a genuine health issue. My own recommendation for news fasts has to do with the psychology of self-motivation. If you go for periods of time without listening to or reading the news, you will notice an upswing in your optimism about life. You'll feel a lift in energy. But shouldn't I stay informed? People ask me. Aren't I being a bad citizen if I don't keep up with what's happening in my community? Shouldn't I be watching the news? In answer to this question, I offer an observation that may startle you. The news is no longer the news. It used to be that Walter Cronkite would end his program by saying, "And that's the way it is." And we trusted that he was right. But today, it's much different. Shock value has the highest premium of all for a news story, and the lines are now blurred between the evening news and the grossest tabloids. Tom Brokaw is as likely to lead his show with a story about a woman cutting off her husband's private parts as is the National Enquirer. Today, the goal of the person putting the evening news show together is to stimulate our emotions in as many ways as possible. Every night we will see human suffering. We will also see con artists, and even whole companies getting away with scams that victimize people cruelly. If there's a report on politics, it features the most venomous attacks between two partisans. The goal of the news today is stimulation. It's to take us on an emotional roller coaster ride. It's a good program if we have been enraged by one story, saddened by another, and amused by it the third. Is it any wonder that by programming our minds with this gross and frightening information all day and into the night, we end up a little less motivated? Is it hard to understand a certain slippage in our optimism? Going on a news fast is a refreshing cure for this problem. You can do it for one day a week, to begin with, and then get back into the tabloid shows the next day if you have to. Once you start fasting, you'll find your entire mood picking up. But what about staying informed, you ask? There are many ways to stay fully informed. The internet has wonderful, thoughtful sites. In fact, it is far better to be informed intellectually than to be informed emotionally. There are weekly and monthly magazines as well as e-zines that do a fine job of informing us and giving us a calm, thoughtful, overall perspective of the news. Don't worry about missing out on important news. Really big news, like a war, a natural disaster, or an assassination will get to you just as quickly during a news fast as it would if you were watching the news. Begin to experiment with news fasts today. Go on a short one at first, and then extend the periods of time as your system allows. When you do return to the news, be totally conscious of just what the show is trying to do to you. Don't passively take it in as if what you are seeing is really the way it is. It's not. They're not going to tell you how many thousands of planes landed safely today. 85. Replace worry with action. Don't worry. Or rather, don't just worry. Let worry change into action. When you find yourself worrying about something, ask yourself the action question, what can I do about this right now? And then do something. Anything. Any small thing. Most of my life, I spent my time asking myself the wrong question every time I worried. I asked myself, what should I be feeling about this? I finally discovered that I was much happier when I started asking, instead, what can I do about this? If I am worried about the conversation I had with my wife last night, and how unfair I might have been to say the things I said, I can ask myself, what can I do about that right now? By putting the question into the action arena, a lot of possibilities will occur to me. 1. I could send her flowers, or 2. I could call her to tell her I was concerned about how I left things, or 3. I could leave a nice little note somewhere for her, or 4. I could go see her to make things right. All of these possibilities are actions, and when I act on something, the worry goes away. We often hear the phrase, worry it to death. But that phrase doesn't reflect what really happens when we worry. It would be great if we could worry something to death. When it dies, we could dispose of the body and be done with it. But when we worry, we don't worry a thing to death, we worry it to life. Our worrying makes the problem grow. And most of the time, we worry it into a grotesque kind of life, a kind of Frankenstein's monster that frightens us beyond all reason. I once came up with a system for action that helped turn my worrying habits completely around. I would list the 5 things that I was worried about. Perhaps they were 4 projects at work and the 5th was my son's trouble he was having with a certain teacher. I would then decide to spend 5 minutes on each problem doing something, anything. By deciding this, I knew I was committing myself to 25 minutes of activity. No more. So it didn't feel at all overwhelming. Then I could make a game of it. On Project 1, a seminar workbook. Deadline for a new course, I'd spend 5 minutes writing it. Maybe I only got the first 2 pages done, but it felt great. It felt like I'd finally started it. Then on item number 2, a meeting I knew I had to have with a client over a sticky contract issue, I would call his office and schedule the meeting and put it in my calendar. That, too, felt good. My third worry, a stack of correspondence I needed to answer, I would take 5 minutes sorting and stacking and putting them into a folder that was separate from the other clutter on my desk. That felt satisfying, too. The fourth item was a travel arrangement that had to be worked out. I'd take no more than 5 minutes looking at my calendar and leaving a voicemail for my travel agent to fax me some alternatives on the trip. Finally, on the matter of my son, I would pull out a piece of paper and write a short letter to his teacher expressing my concern for him, my support of her efforts, and my desire to arrange a meeting quickly, so all 3 of us could sit down together and make some agreements. All of that took 25 minutes. And 5 things that were worrying me the most were no longer worrying me. I could then go back anytime later and work them to completion. If something is worrying you, always do something about it. It doesn't have to be the big thing that will make it disappear. It can be any small thing. But the positive effect it will have on you will be enormous. A friend of mine was worried about her cat, which had some mild symptoms of illness, but nothing that looked severe enough to take the cat to the veterinarian. She also thought the symptoms were so subtle that they might not be easy to describe to the vet, but still she worried. She brought the subject up 2 or 3 more times before I finally said to her, "You must do something." "That's just the problem, there's nothing to do," she said. "Take some kind of action," I said. "Call the vet and talk to him." That doesn't make sense because the vet wouldn't know anything from what I told him, and he'd probably ask me to take her in to see him, and I know it's not that serious, she said. "Yes, I understand," I said. "But you should take the action for you, not for the cat or the vet. By not doing anything you're keeping yourself trapped in worrying." "Okay," she said. "I see what you mean." When she called the vet, to her surprise, the vet was able to make a good assessment of what was wrong. He recommended that she bring the cat in, and if it was what he thought it was, he could give her something to clear it up right away. Anything that worries you should be acted on, not just thought about. Don't be scared about the action, you can make it very small and easy, as long as you take an action. Even small actions will chase away your fears. Fear has a hard time coexisting with action. When there's action, there's no fear. When there's fear, there's no action. The next time you're worried about something, ask yourself, what small thing can I do right now? Then do it. Remember not to ask, what could I possibly do to make this whole thing go away? That question does not get you into action at all. Acting on your worries frees you up for other things. It removes fear and uncertainty from your life and puts you back in control of creating what you want. Just do it. 86. Run with the thinkers. The president of a major office equipment company put his problem to me this way: how do I get the whiners in my company to stop whining and start coming up with solutions? He went on to explain that he had 2 kinds of people working for him, the whiners and the thinkers. The whiners were often very smart and dedicated employees who worked long, hard hours. But when they came into the manager's office, it was almost always to complain. "They're great at finding fault with other managers and telling me what's wrong with our systems," the president said, "but they are a drain on me because they're so negative that I end up trying to make them feel better. After that, I'm depressed." The thinkers, on the other hand, had a different way of coming into the office with problems. "The thinkers come to me with ideas," he said. "They see the same problems that the whiners see, but they've already thought about possible solutions. The thinkers, in other words, have assumed ownership of the company, and are creating the future of the company with their thinking. The whiners have stopped thinking. Once the problems are identified, and their reaction to them justified, the thinking stops. The thinkers have taken their reaction to the company's problems past their emotions, and into their minds. And because they have formulated some solutions, the nature of their meeting with the manager is creative. It's a brainstorming meeting. The manager enjoys these meetings because they stimulate his mind, too. Both parties leave the meeting feeling energized intellectually, and the manager looks forward to future meetings with the thinkers. The whiners have left their reaction to their company's problems down at the emotional level. They express resentment, fear, and worry. The manager's problem in such a meeting is that he deals primarily with those emotions, so he finishes the meeting with his own sense of discouragement. When you are committed to self-motivation as a way of life, you will fall into the realm of the thinker. Your thinking not only creates your motivation, but it creates your relationships, your family, and the organization you work for as well, because they are all a part of you. You are more valuable to your organization with this orientation to thinking, and you're more valuable to yourself. 87. Put more enjoyment in. There is a huge difference between pleasure and enjoyment. And when we're absolutely clear about the difference, we can grow much faster toward a focused and energized life. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi best describes this difference in his various books on flow, the psychological state that we get in when time disappears and we are thoroughly engaged in what we're doing. Csikszentmihalyi distinguishes what we do for pleasure, routine sex, eating, drinking, etc., from what we do for enjoyment. Enjoyment is deeper. Enjoyment always involves the use of a skill and the facing of a challenge. So sailing, gardening, painting, bowling, golfing, cooking, and any such activity involving skills meeting a challenge constitute enjoyment. People who get clear on that difference begin to put more enjoyment into their lives. They reach the happy and fulfilled psychological state known as flow. Increasing their skills and seeking challenges to engage those skills are what lead to an enjoyable life. There are many stories and accounts about the winners of lotteries who are jubilant when they win, but whose lives descend into a nightmare after acquiring that unearned money. No challenge, no skill. The lottery looks like the answer to people because they associate money with pleasure. But the true enjoyment of money comes in part from the earning of it, which involves skill and challenge. Watching television is usually done for pleasure. That's why so few people can remember, or make use of, any of the 30 hours of television they have watched in the past week. In watching television, there is no combination of skill and challenge. Contrast the dull pleasure hangover we get from watching television with what happens when we spend the same amount of time preparing for a big Thanksgiving dinner for friends and relatives. In looking back, we remember quite vividly the entire Thanksgiving endeavor. One of the most inspirational people I know of is Martha Stewart. She personifies mastery of the concept of enjoyment. Her magazines and videotapes celebrate cooking, gardening, and home entertainment skills. Her own contagious enthusiasm for the things she enjoys and teaches others makes her, in my opinion, one of today's true heroes of optimism. If you're feeling like you have forgotten how to enjoy your own home, yard, and kitchen, buy one of her videotapes and allow her to inspire you. You can increase your own self-motivation by learning to be more aware of the profound difference between enjoyment and mere pleasure. 88. Keep walking. Ever since I was a child, I had a recurring dream that I began each day facing a mattress. The more I pushed into this mattress before my day began, the more the indentation went in, and the more saved up the strong energy the mattress got. The more the mattress was indented with my pushing at the start of the day, the higher it would spring up when I lay down on it to sleep at night. I would lie down on this mattress at night and see how high my dreams would fly me. How high I flew would always depend on the indentations I gave the mattress during the day. The impressions I gave it. How impressive I was. The difference I made. So then after thinking about that dream the other day, I decided to step up my walking. I decided that the recurring dream was the way my subconscious chose to tell me something vital. Something about the difference walking made. Something about oxygen being pushed into my system. Walking would be an action I could take while wide awake. Walking would drive more oxygen into my lungs. I would become more like the great football coach Amos Alonzo Stagg, who lived to be 103 years old. Amos Alonzo Stagg was asked how he lived to be so old. The average life expectancy during his lifetime was 65, and he said, "I have, for the greater part of my life, indulged in running and other vigorous exercise that forced large amounts of oxygen into my body. I increased my walking just to see what would happen if my lungs became my mattress. I began to get happier. I began to enjoy life more. I began to be more motivated. As I walked, I wondered, what if the spirit lives as an aura around us? What if the spirit were a cloud of energy that exists around and outside our bodies ready at all times to be breathed in, drawn right into the soul? What if when you breathed deeply, you pulled in your own spirit, and you received energy for action, energy for an explosive takedown of one of your out-of-control problems? What if the solution to problems outside you was inside you?" Deepak Chopra quotes an ancient anonymous Indian sage as identifying humanity's near-fatal superstition. You believe that you live in the universe when in reality the universe lives in you. Many modern scientific books are now referring to the human brain as the 3-pound universe. When the body moves, so does the mind. So does that inner world. When you're walking, you are organizing your mind whether you want to be or not. Soon we realize that the mind and the body are connected. When the Greeks said the secret to a happy life was a sound mind and a sound body, they were on to a powerful truth. I try to talk myself out of that truth many times a week. I'm too tired to exercise. I have an injury. I haven't had enough sleep. I should listen to my body. I would be shortchanging my children of the important time they need with me if I selfishly went out for my long walk. But I am always better off if I choose the walk. I am even better at relating to my children, because walking takes me to the soul. That's why I can't leave it out. I can't pretend it has nothing to do with this subject, because it's how I pull the truth to me. I pull the globe around toward me under my feet by walking. As the world turns, the lies leak out of my mind into space. As the body becomes sound, so does the mind. It's true. And the songs in my head keep the rhythm of the walk going. Fats Domino. Ricky Nelson. 10 years after. I'm walking. Yes indeed. I'm going home. There is something about walking that combines opposites. Opposites, activity, and relaxation. This very paradox is what creates whole brain thinking. Opposites, out in the world and solitude. Alone, but out there walking. This combining of opposites activates the harmony I need between the right and left brain, between the adult and the child, between the higher self and the animal. Great solutions appear. Truth becomes beauty. You have your own walking available to you, too. Yes indeed. It might be dancing or swimming or running or racquetball or boxing or aerobics, but it's all the same thing. It's all a way of moving the body around like a merry plaything and oxygenating the spirit in the process. 89. Read more mysteries. My great friend and editor Kathy Imers, to whom I first dedicated this book, and later married, has always been a devoted reader of mystery novels. When I first met her, I thought, how curious that someone so intelligent would be reading mystery novels all the time. It was especially interesting to me because Kathy is one of the most literate people I'd ever met, a quick thinker and a skilled professional writer and editor. Her editing of my books had been the one thing, in my opinion, that gave them the sparkle that people said they enjoyed. In my own ignorance, I assumed mystery novels were pretty light fare. Hardly a challenge to the human mind. Now I've begun to change my mind. Not only am I peeking into some of the mystery books she has recommended, I've enjoyed Agatha Christie and Colin Dexter, but I've begun to find out more about what good mystery does to the intellectual energy of the human mind. Kathy has one of the most creative and energetic problem-solving minds I've ever encountered. I constantly marvel at her mental energy and perception because it stays clear and sharp all day and long into the night. I would often find my own mental acuity descending the evolutionary ladder as night approached, while hers stayed alive and creative. The person with the highest IQ ever measured, Marilyn Vos Savant, recommends mystery novels as brain builders. Not only is this exercise fun, but it's good for you, she says. I'm not talking about violent thrillers or police procedural novels, but instead I'm directing you to those elegant, clue-filled, intelligent mysteries solved by drawing conclusions, not guns. Vos Savant sees the reading of mysteries as something that leads to a stronger intelligence. If you try to keep one step ahead of the detective in an Agatha Christie or a Josephine Tay or a P.D. James mystery novel, it will sharpen your intuition, she writes in Brain Building. The Sherlock Holmes stories by Arthur Conan Doyle never go out of favor, and rightly so. Holmes's methods are brain builders brought to life. When people think of personal transformation, they don't normally think they can strengthen their own intelligence. IQ is something our cultural attitudes have always said we're born with and stuck with. But Vos Savant, whose IQ was measured at 230, the average adult IQ is 100, believes strongly that the brain can be built as surely and as quickly as the muscles of the body. So the next time you feel like curling up with a good mystery, don't feel guilty or non-productive. It might be the most productive thing you've done all day. 90. Think your way up. In some of my seminars I like to draw a picture of a ladder on the board and call it the ladder of selves. On the very bottom I write the physical, in the middle I put the emotional, and at the top I place the mind. We can move up or down this ladder by the sheer force of will, although most people don't know they have that option. By traveling up the ladder, past the physical, through the emotional, and into your mind, you have the opportunity to be creative and thoughtful. You can see possibilities. Many of us, however, never get past the emotional section of the ladder. When we're stuck there, we begin thinking with our feelings instead of thinking with our minds. If you hurt my feelings, and I'm angry and resentful, I might give you a long and eloquent speech about what's wrong with you and how you operate. But, because I'm thinking with my feelings instead of my mind, I'm destroying something with my speech instead of creating an understanding. People do this without knowing it. They let their emotions speak for them, instead of their thoughts. So what you hear is fear, anger, sadness, or other emotions put to words, but never creating anything. If you can picture this ladder inside of you, and start to notice that you are letting your feelings do your thinking and speaking, you can move up. You can get creative and really think and then speak. As Emmett Fox says, love is always creative and fear is always destructive. Go ahead and feel your feelings. But when it's time to talk, let your mind into the conversation. Your mind is what motivates you to your highest performance, not your feelings. 91. Exploit your weakness. Make a list of your strengths and your weaknesses on separate pieces of paper. Place the list of strengths somewhere where you'll see it again, because it will always pick you up. Now look at your list of weaknesses and study them for a while. Stay with them until you feel no shame or guilt about them. Allow them to become interesting characteristics, instead of negative traits. Ask yourself how each characteristic could be useful to you. That's not what we usually ask about our weaknesses, but that's my whole point. When I was a boy, I remember watching a remarkable tap dancer by the name of Peg Leg Bates on the Ed Sullivan Show. Bates had lost his leg early in life, a circumstance that would lead most people to give up any dreams of becoming a professional dancer. But to Bates, losing a leg was not a weakness for long. He made it his strength. He put a tap at the bottom of his peg leg and developed an amazing, syncopated tap dancing style. Obviously, he stood apart from other dancers in auditions, and it wasn't long before his weakness became his strength. Master fundraiser Michael Basoff has dazzled the development world by turning unappreciated staff members into great fundraisers. He, too, likes people's weaknesses, because he knows that they can be turned into strengths. If there is a shy secretary in the development office he's working with, he turns that person into the staff's best listener. Soon donors can't wait to talk to that person because she listens so well and makes people feel so important. When Arnold Schwarzenegger became a professional actor, he had a weakness, his thick Austrian accent. It wasn't long, however, before Arnold incorporated his accent into the charm of his action hero. Personality on the screen, and a former weakness became a strength. His accent became an identifying part of his character, and people everywhere began imitating it. One of my weaknesses early in life was my difficulty in talking to people. I had no confidence in my ability to speak and converse, so I got in the habit of writing people letters and notes. After a while I got so practiced with it that I turned it into a strength. My letter writing and thank you notes have created many relationships for me that would not have been created if I just focused on my shyness as a weakness. I have 4 children, but I didn't begin having children until I was 35 years old. For a long time I saw myself as being older than normal to be a father. I worried about it. I wondered if my son or daughters would be uncomfortable with a father so old. And then I realized that this didn't have to be a weakness. I thought about who I was when I was 25, and what a difficult time I would have had being a good father back then. Soon I took this weakness to be a great strength. Then one day, while watching The Little Mermaid with my kids, I saw myself as the father in that movie, vigorous, strong, and wise, with flowing white hair. It was the perfect image. I now see my age as a major strength in raising my kids. The only weakness was in the way I was looking at it. I have 4 children, but I didn't begin having children until I was 35 years old. For a long time I saw myself as being older than normal to be a father. I worried about it. I wondered if my son or daughters would be uncomfortable with a father so old. And then I realized that this didn't have to be a weakness. There isn't anything on your weakness list that can't be a strength for you if you think about it long enough. The problem is, our weaknesses embarrass us. But embarrassment is not real thinking. Once we really start thinking about our weaknesses, they can become strengths, and creative possibilities emerge. 92. Try becoming the problem. Whatever type of problem you are facing, the most self-motivational exercise I know of is to immediately say to yourself, I am the problem. Because once you see yourself as the problem, you can see yourself as the solution. This insight was dramatically described by James Belasco in Flight of the Buffalo. This is the insight I realized early and return to often. He wrote, in most situations, I am the problem. My mentalities, my pictures, my expectations, form the biggest obstacle to my success. By seeing ourselves as victims of our problems, we lose the power to solve them. We shut down creativity when we declare the source of the trouble to be outside of us. However, once we say, I am the problem, there is great power that shifts from the outside to the inside. Now we can become the solution. You can use this process the same way a detective uses a premise to clarify the crime scene. If the detective says, what if there were 2 murderers, not 1, she can then think in a way that reveals new possibilities. She doesn't have to prove that there were 2 murderers in order to think the problem through as if there were. The same is true when you become willing always to see yourself as the problem. It is simply a way to think. Unfortunately, our society today is in the habit of thinking the opposite of I am the problem. Time magazine even ran a cover story called A Nation of Finger Pointers that made a powerful and persuasive case for the fact that we have become a nation of victims who see the American dream not as striving fulfilled, but as unachieved entitlement. In The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, Nathaniel Branden writes, to feel competent to live and worthy of happiness, I need to experience a sense of control over my existence. This requires that I be willing to take responsibility for my actions and the attainment of my goals. This means that I take responsibility for my life and my well-being. Before I had realized the full power of a self-motivated life, I spent a lot of years pointing fingers. If I didn't have enough money, it was somebody else's fault. Even my perceived personality flaws were somebody else's fault. I was never taught that. I would shout in exasperation. No one showed me early in life how to be self-sufficient, was a complaint I voiced often. But I was avoiding a basic truth. I was the problem. The reason I fought so hard to avoid the truth was that I never realized it contained good news. I thought it looked entirely shameful and negative. But once I discovered that accepting responsibility for the problem also gave me new power for solving it, I became free. 93. Enlarge your objective. Here is another self-motivator that also must be used as an intellectual tool only. Take a certain goal of yours and double it, or triple it, or multiply it by 10, and then ask yourself, quite seriously, what you would have to do to achieve that new goal. I used this game recently with a friend who holds a position in sales. He came to see me because he was selling $100,000 worth of product each month, the most on his team, and wanted to somehow get to $140,000. I asked him to tell me what it would take for him to sell $200,000 worth of equipment each month. $200,000, he shouted. That's impossible. I'm leading the team already with $100,000, and nobody thought that could be done. What would you have to do? I persisted. No, he said. You don't understand. I want to hit $140,000 a month, and even that is so hard I don't know how I'll do it. I finally told him the theory behind this game. If you seriously look at an outrageous goal, such as $200,000, it will open things up for you creatively that wouldn't have opened up if you stayed looking at $140,000. He nodded slowly and reluctantly agreed to play along for a while. Okay, he said. But remember, we're talking about something that's impossible. Fine, I said. But if your life depended on hitting $200,000 next month, what exactly would you do? He laughed and then started listing things as I wrote them down on a flip pad. After he got through the ridiculous ideas, like stealing other people's accounts and cooking the books, he began to think of more ideas. At first it was hard. I'd have to be 2 places at once, he said. I'd have to make twice as many presentations as I'm making. I'd have to present to 2 clients at once. Then it hit him. All of a sudden he got the idea that he might be able to stage a large presentation of his product with a number of clients in the room at one time. I could rent a room at a hotel and have 20 people in for coffee and donuts, and I could make a big deal out of it, he said. A number of other ideas came to him: ways to combine his cold calling with his travel time, ways to utilize email as a sales tool, how to use the administrative staff better, and ways to expand his contracts so that they would cover longer periods of time for a higher original fee, but at a lower overall rate. Idea after idea came to him while I wrote furiously on the pad. All of the ideas were a result of his thinking big. How would I sell $200,000 if I absolutely had to? He surpassed his goal of $140,000 the very next month. I've often used this method for self-motivation with myself. If I have a goal of signing 2 seminar contracts in the next 3 weeks, I'll often get out a pad of paper and ask, how would I get 10 contracts signed in 3 weeks? Inflating my goal puts me at a different level of thinking, and because I'm solving the problem of 10, I always get at least 2. If you want to really get some fresh motivational ideas, try expanding your goal. Blow it up until it scares you. Then proceed in your thinking as if it's a must that you achieve it. Remember that this is just a self-contained game, not a promise to anyone else. But it's a game that's fun to play because it works. 94. Give yourself flying lessons. We need heroes in our lives. They are not a sign of weakness, they are a source of strength. Without heroes, said Bernard Malamud, we are all plain people and we don't know how far we can go. Heroes show us what's possible for a human being to accomplish. Therefore, heroes are very useful to anyone who is in the process of finally understanding self-motivation. But unless we consciously select our heroes in order to use them as inspiration, we simply end up envying great people instead of emulating them. When used properly, a hero can be an enriching source of energy and inspiration. You don't have to have just one hero either. Choose a number of them. Put their pictures up. Become an expert on their lives. Collect books about them. My youngest sister, Cindy, as a shy little girl, always admired Amelia Earhart. Not long ago, after she had reached her 30s, she revealed to me that she had been taking flying lessons. I was stunned. A few weeks after that, the family went out to a little airport outside of town to watch her fly her first solo. I was so scared, said Cindy, that my mouth and throat went completely dry. Flying has nothing to do with what Cindy does for a living. She just took lessons and learned to pilot a plane because of the impression that her hero, Amelia Earhart, made on her as a little girl. We grow into that which we admire, said Emmett Fox. Before he became a famous author, Napoleon Hill was struggling as a writer and speaker. He had a friend whose restaurant business was not doing well, and Hill offered to give free motivational speeches at the restaurant one night a week to help his friend increase his business. The speeches helped his friend a little, but they helped Hill a lot. He began to gain a large following. When I read about that part of Hill's life, it gave me an idea. At the time I wanted to be a full-time speaker and I didn't know where to begin. I'd done a few seminars and talks here and there, but there was no pattern or purposeful direction to it. I decided to emulate Hill. I began putting on a free, open to the public workshop every Thursday night at the company where I was working as a marketing director. At first, the workshops were not well attended. I had to spend part of the week begging people to come. Once the audience was 2 people. But week by week the workshop's reputation grew and my own experience grew along with it. Soon we had large audiences waiting to get in on Thursday nights, and I credit that little free workshop with putting me into full-time public speaking. Was it an original idea? No, I stole it. I copied a hero of mine. But our awareness of the choice involving heroes is vital for self-creation. We can envy them or we can emulate them. The best use of heroes is not to just be in awe of them, but to learn something from them, to let their lives inspire us. They are only people like we are. What distinguishes them from us is the great levels they've reached in self-motivation. To passively adore them is to insult our own potential. Instead of looking up to our heroes, it is much more beneficial to look into them. 95. Hold your vision accountable. It's not what a vision is, says Robert Fritz, it's what a vision does. What does your vision do? Does it give you energy? Does it make you smile? Does it get you up in the morning? When you're tired, does it take you that extra mile? A vision should be judged by these criteria, the criteria of power and effectiveness. What does it do? Robert Fritz is widely quoted in Peter Sen's business masterpiece, The Fifth Discipline. Fritz is a former musician who has taken the basic principles of creativity in music composition and applied them to creating successful professional lives. Life gets good, he argues, when we get clear on what we want to create. Most people spend most of their waking hours trying to make problems go away. This lifelong crusade to solve one's problems is a negative and reactive existence. It sells us short and leaves us at the end of life, or at the end of the day, with, at best, the double negative feeling of fewer problems. There is a profound difference between problem solving and creating, Fritz points out in The Path of Least Resistance. Problem solving is taking action to have something go away, the problem. Creating is taking action to have something come into being, the creation. Most of us have been raised in a tradition of problem solving and have little real exposure to the creative process. Step 1 in the creative process is having a vision of what you want to create. Without this vision, there is no way to create. Without this vision, you are only problem eliminating, which is a double negative. It's impossible to feel positive about a life based on a double negative. So the way to alter your thinking is to notice when you're drifting into, what do I want to get rid of, and mentally replace that thinking with, what do I want to bring into being? When Fritz says that we have been raised in a tradition of problem solving, he is almost understating it. We are programmed and wired to think that way every day. Notice the thinking of people as they approach a challenge, even a challenge as small as an upcoming meeting with other people. Here's what I hope doesn't happen, one will say. Well, here's how you can avoid that, someone else will helpfully say. The only problem we have is this, a third person will say, attempting to make the meeting seem less frightening. Notice that nowhere was there the question, what would we like to bring into being as a result of this meeting? Whether the situation is as small as a meeting or as large as your whole life, the most useful question you can ask yourself is, what do I want to bring into being? It's a beautiful question, because it makes no reference to problems or obstacles. It implies pure creativity. It puts you back on the positive side of life. My friend Steve Hardison made an observation about self-motivation that I have always remembered and agreed with. It's just one thought, he said. Motivational teachers repeat it many different ways, but it's just one thought, it's a binary system. Are you on or are you off? Are you positive or are you negative? Are you creating or are you reacting? Are you on or are you off? Are you life or are you death? Are you day or are you night? Are you in or are you out? Is you is or is you ain't? And there's nothing more motivational to flip your binary switch to on than a clear vision of what it is that you really want. What do you want to bring into being? It doesn't matter what that vision is or how often it changes. It only matters what that vision does. If your vision isn't getting you up in the morning, then make up another one. Keep at it until you develop a vision that's so colorful and clear that it puts you in action just to think about it. 96. Build your power base. Knowledge is power. What you know is your power base, it's the battery you run on. You need to charge it constantly and consciously. Who do you want to be in charge of what you know? News directors? Radio disc jockeys? The office gossip? Tabloid newspaper editors? A pessimistic family member? Unless we consciously decide to build our own knowledge base, with a sense of direction to it, then we will be programmed, totally, by random input. Feeling miserable and alienated from life is caused by not being in control of what we know. Misery and alienation are not laid upon us by fate, wrote Colin Wilson. They are due to the failure of the ego to accept its role as the controller of consciousness. All our experiences of happiness and intensity force the same conviction upon us, for they involve a sense of mastery. You can be the master of your own fate. You can make choices all day long about what you are going to learn and what you are not going to learn. What are you reading over there? Someone may ask you. Oh, it's just something I found in the trash, you might say. And it might seem harmless enough to read something you found in the wastebasket because there was nothing else nearby, but whole lives are shaped that way. The computer term GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, is even truer for the human biocomputer than it is for mechanical computers. Take control of what you know. The more you know about what motivates you, the easier it is to motivate yourself. The more you know about the human brain, the less trouble you have operating it. Knowledge is power. Respect yours and build on it. 97. Connect truth to beauty. I hate reading motivational material that thunders at me about the importance of integrity and honesty for their own sake. Somehow, that always seems to turn me off, because the writers come off like angry preachers and teachers. Hardly inspiring. I'm always inspired better by things that are made to look interesting and fun. I'm always taken in by a promise of life being more beautiful and rarely taken in by a promise of a life being more righteous and proper. To me, the best case to make for honesty is how beautiful it is, how clean and clear it makes the journey from current reality to the dream. When people know exactly where they are, they can go somewhere from there. But being lost is a function of dishonesty. And when we're lost, or dishonest, anywhere we go from there is wrong. When we start with a false reading, there's no direction home. Like Bob Dylan's Rolling Stone, we don't know who we are. We feel, at the core, like a complete unknown. Truth, on the other hand, is clear, complete, and compellingly vivid. It is solid and strong, so it can hold us steady as we climb. Truth, said poet John Keats, is beauty. The more honest we are with others and ourselves about current reality, the more energy and focus we gather. We don't have to keep track of what we told one person or what we told another. One of the best and most positive explanations of the beauty of personal integrity was expressed by Nathaniel Branden in The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. Branden, unlike most writers on the subject, sees truth and integrity as a positive part of the process of self-esteem. His point is not that we owe it to other people's sense of morality to be honest, but that we owe it to ourselves. One of the great self-deceptions, said Branden, is to tell oneself, only I will know. Only I will know that I am a liar. Only I will know that I deal unethically with people who trust me. Only I will know that I have no intention of honoring my promise. The implication is that my judgment is unimportant and that only the judgment of others counts. Branden's writing on personal integrity is inspiring because it's directed at creating a happier and stronger self, not at a universal appeal for morality. One of the ways we describe a work of art that is sloppy and unfinished is as a mess. The problem with lying, or lying by omission, is that it leaves everything so incomplete in a mess. Truth always completes the picture, any picture. And when a picture is complete, whole, and integrated, we see it as beautiful. I'll even hear about people, usually people who you can't believe about anything, described as a mess. And conversely, a person who you can always count on to be honest with you is often referred to as a beautiful person. Truth and beauty become impossible to separate. Truth leads you to a more confident level in your relationships with others and with yourself. It diminishes fear and increases your sense of personal mastery. Lies and half-truths will always weigh you down, whereas truth will clear up your thinking and give you the energy and clarity needed for self-motivation. 98. Read yourself a story. Abraham Lincoln used to drive his law partners to distraction. Every morning he would come into his office and read the daily newspaper aloud to himself. They would hear him in the next room reading in a booming voice. Why did Lincoln do his morning reading aloud? He had discovered that he remembered and retained twice as much when he read aloud than when he read silently. And what he did remember, he remembered for a much longer period of time. Perhaps it was because Lincoln was employing his second sense, the sense of hearing, and his second activity, the activity of speaking, which made his readings so memorable to him. Anytime you have an opportunity to read something that is important to you, try reading it aloud and see if you don't make twice the impression on yourself. When you discover something you want to remember and draw upon in the future, read it aloud. Steve Hardison, one of the most successful business consultants I have ever known, credits one origin of his success to when he was a struggling young man without money or a clue about where he wanted to go. Then one day he came across Napoleon Hill's enormous book, Law of Success, and read the entire volume aloud. My favorite piece of writing to read aloud is Chapter 16 of O.G. Mandino's The Greatest Salesman in the World. Here's a part of it, which you may now read silently to yourself. However, if you want a real shot of adrenaline to your spirit, I recommend you mark this page and when you're alone, read it aloud like Lincoln. I will act now. I will act now. I will act now. Henceforth, I will repeat these words again and again, each hour, each day, every day, until the words become a habit as my breathing and the actions which follow become as instinctive as the blinking of my eyelids. With these words I can condition my mind to perform every act necessary for my success. With these words I can condition my mind to meet every challenge. 99. Laugh for no reason. Become a performer. Be an actor and a singer. Act like you already feel like you want to feel. Don't wait until the feeling motivates you. It could be a long wait. American philosopher William James put it very clearly, we do not sing because we are happy because we sing. Most of us believe an emotion, such as happiness, comes first. Then we do whatever we do, in reaction to that particular emotion. Not so, insisted James. The emotion arises simultaneously with the doing of the act. So if you want to be enthusiastic, you can get there by acting as if you were already enthusiastic. Sometimes it takes a minute. Sometimes it skips a beat. But it always works if you stay with it, no matter how ridiculous you feel doing it. Feel ridiculous. If you want to be happy, find the happiest song you know and sing it. It works. Not always in the first few moments, but if you keep at it, it works. Just fake it until you make it. Soon your happy singing will show you how much control you do have over your own emotions. Zen monks do a laughing meditation in which they all gather in a circle and get ready to laugh. At the stroke of a certain hour the teacher hits a gong, and all the monks begin to laugh. They have to laugh, whether or not they feel like it. But after a few moments the laughter becomes contagious. Soon all the monks are laughing genuinely and heartily. Children do this, too. They start giggling for no reason, often at the dinner table or some other forbidden setting, and the giggling itself makes them laugh. The truth is this, laughter itself can make you laugh. The secret of happiness is hidden inside that last sentence. But adults aren't always comfortable with this. Adults want kids to have reasons for laughing. As I used to drive my children long distances to visit relatives, I'd get most irritated when they began laughing and giggling in the back seat without reason. I developed a backstroke swing to curb the laughter. "Why are you laughing?" I would shout. "You have no reason to be laughing. This is a dangerous highway and I'm trying to drive here." But adults, like me, might want to get back that appreciation for joyful spontaneity. We might want to confront the question, what is the one thing that most makes me feel like singing? And then know the answer, singing. What most gets you in the mood to dance? Dancing. The next time you ask someone to dance, and they say, "I don't feel like dancing," you might reply, "That's because you're not dancing." 100. Walk with Love and Death. I am a coward. That was how the book began. It was a novel I was reading not long after I had graduated from high school, and those first words staggered me. I remember staring at those words, unable to continue reading. I was so stunned. Never has a book connected with me so quickly. For I was a coward, too. It's just that I never admitted it so openly as did the author of A Walk with Love and Death. The author was Hans Königsberger, and the book was a medieval love story later made into a movie by John Huston. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that there was another coward on the planet other than me. Even if he was fictional, the words were real enough for me. My self-image at the time I read that book was based on my fears and nothing else. In my mind, I was truly a coward. And if someone were to tell me I'd done something brave, I'd think they were wrong somehow. Or that they didn't know how easy that thing was. Where did this self-image come from? I don't blame my parents, because I believe we create our own pictures of ourselves, and I had a choice whether to stick with this self-image or not. After all, I could have done what Gordon Liddy did when he was a boy, upset that he was afraid of rats. He caught some, cooked them, and ate them. Upset that he was afraid of thunder and lightning, he strapped himself to the top of a large tree where he stayed for the duration during a major electrical storm. These kinds of things I did not do. Although I don't blame my parents, I can trace where I got the idea of my being a coward to their encouragement. My mother, too, was afraid of everything. She lived to the age of 66 without ever having made a left-hand turn in traffic, so afraid she was of oncoming traffic. She always knew how to make a looping series of right turns to get where she was going. She consoled me and told me that I was just like her. A coward, I thought. She was very loving and empathetic about it, but my self-image became unshakable. However, my mother said she'd try to be there to help me do the many things she knew I wouldn't be able to do. I met my father when I was 2.5 years old. He was a war hero, home from World War II, and it is reported that when he walked into our home and saw me for the first time, I looked up at his imposing uniformed figure and said, "Who is that?" "John Wayne," my mother should have said, because my father was afraid of nothing. He was a decorated soldier, a star athlete, a tough and successful businessman, and the list goes on. But he soon knew one thing about his little boy, no guts, and it was distressing to him. So, both parents and the child himself were all in agreement about it. The father was upset about it, the mother understood, and the boy was just scared. That is possibly why, as I grew older, I discovered false courage. I discovered, through use of an intoxicating substance, that I could be who I wanted to be. But soon the marvelous discovery turned to addiction, and my life revolved around my dependency on it. They were wild times, but as anyone will tell you who's been through it, there was no growth or fulfillment during those years. They soon became an intolerable nightmare. Fortunately, I recovered. It has been more than 20 years since I've had to resort to chemically-based courage. During that recovery period, which was often difficult, I came to learn a prayer that was popular among fellow recovering people. They called it the Serenity Prayer, and you've probably heard it. It goes like this: God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I think it was called the Serenity Prayer because that's what everyone wanted from the prayer, serenity. Abruptly ending a long period of substance abuse can leave you far short of serene. Although with each passing day it gets better and better, that prayer was something to hang on to. But after being clean and sober started to work for me, I knew something was still missing. I knew I needed more than serenity. My deep-seated self-image of being a coward had not gone away, and so I turned my attention to the second line in the prayer, the courage to change the things I can. In my mind, it was no longer the Serenity Prayer, it had become the Courage Prayer. Courage was still what I lacked, and that feeling of personal cowardice was still my entire self-image. It shaped my whole personality. When my friend Mike Killebrew gave me Napoleon Hill's The Master Key to Riches, the answer to my courage prayer began to come to me. If I didn't have the courage inside of me, I would create it. And at that moment, the process of self-motivation began in earnest. I could cite you many examples of the fears I had, but to illustrate how I overcame them, I'll use an example I referred to earlier, my fear of public speaking. I've since learned that the fear of public speaking is not unique to me. In fact, it's considered the #1 fear among our population today, even greater than the fear of death. To me, though, it was a painful manifestation of the overall deep fear that constituted my entire personality. I laughed knowingly once when Woody Allen said that he was afraid of the dark and feared the light of day. That was me. When I finally made myself join an acting class to face my fear of speaking, I learned to my horror that I was the only non-actor in the class. In our first session, led by the hugely talented actress and coach Judy Rawlings, I listened as everyone in the class talked about all the recent stage productions they had been in. Judy gave us each a long monologue to learn and recite in the next session. Mine was from Spoon River Anthology, and my character was a judge who had been mocked as a young man, but rose to judge those in the community who used to make fun of him. It was a challenging piece, and I was terrified. I knew I had to do something harder than the recital to prepare for the recital, so I set out to do it. I memorized my part and began to perform it in front of people. I asked whoever would listen to sit down and watch me recite this piece. I did it in front of my actress friend Judy LeBeau, who had gotten me into the class. I did it on tape and sent it to songwriter and comedian Fred Knight. I did it in front of my friend Kathy. I made my children sit quietly and watch me do it over and over. Each time, I was scared, my heart was pounding, and I hyperventilated. But each time it got easier and better. Finally, the day of the class arrived. I took the day off from work to rehearse this little 3-minute piece all day. When class time arrived, I was extremely nervous, but not deeply panicked. In my life, there's a big and welcome difference. Judy Rawlings asked for volunteers to perform their monologues, and as each experienced actor got up to do theirs, I gained confidence. I could see that they, too, were very nervous. They were acting in front of peers, which is sometimes harder than before a normal audience. They were blowing their lines and, in embarrassment, asking to start over. Some of their voices were a little shaky. I was encouraged. Finally, with just 1 or 2 of us left to go, I volunteered and walked slowly to the front of the room. What happened then is something I'll never forget. As I went to the front of the room, just before I turned around to face the teacher in class, a voice in my mind spoke to me, and it said only one word, "Showtime." With a surprising surge of energy, I delivered my piece. My voice soared up and hit the dramatic points and dropped down to emphasize the subtle lines and the parts that I gave a funny interpretation to were drawing huge laughs from the class. When I was finished, I looked back up and saw that the whole class had burst out clapping, something Judy had told them not to do for anybody. When I drove home that night, I was in heaven. I kept reciting my monologue out loud, reveling in the memory of their laughter and clapping. The thing I thought I feared most in life was somehow mastered. And I repeated to myself the principle I had used to make it happen: the more I sweat in peacetime, the less I bleed in war. I often look back on who I was when I first encountered the words, "I am a coward," in a walk with love and death. And I realized that today I have something that I didn't have back then, the knowledge that courage can be created. I still have fears, but I no longer am fear. I no longer think of myself as a coward. And when people compliment me on something I'd done that they think was courageous, I don't dismiss them as being crazy or stupid. There is a way I use to motivate myself to overcome any fear that's in my way today. It's a way I've never told anyone about until now, because it has a strange name. I call it walk with love and death. When I need to get through something, face something, or create a courageous action plan, I take long walks. When I walk long and far enough, a solution always appears. I eventually get oriented to the most creative course of action. When you walk, writes Andrew Weil in Spontaneous Healing, the movement of your limbs is cross-patterned. The right leg and left arm move forward at the same time, then the left leg and right arm. This type of movement generates electrical activity in the brain that has a harmonizing influence on the central nervous system, a special benefit of walking that you do not necessarily get from other kinds of exercise. I call it a walk with love because love and fear are opposites. Most people think love and hate are opposites, but they are not. The ultimate creativity occurs from a spirit of love and, as Emmett Fox says, love is always creative, and fear is always destructive. I call it a walk with death, because it is only the acceptance and awareness of my own death that gives my life the clarity that it needs to be exciting. My walks often last a long time. Somehow, whatever challenge I'm facing appears to me from many different angles as I'm walking. I know that one of the real values is that while walking, I'm truly alone with myself. There are no phones to answer or people to talk to. I create so little of that kind of time in life that it's always surprising how beneficial it is. Take your own challenges out for a walk. Feel your self-motivation growing inside you, as the electricity in your brain starts to harmonize your central nervous system. You'll soon know for a fact that you have what it takes. You won't have to pray for the courage to change the things you will already have it. Afterward. 101. Teach yourself the power of negative thinking. I discovered something remarkable quite by accident one night as I was conducting a workshop on goal achievement. I discovered the power of negative thinking. As the people in the workshop struggled to list their goals on a piece of paper, I ran out of patience. How will you get what you want if you don't know what it is? I asked the room, half of which still had empty sheets of paper and empty facial expressions. Okay, I said, let's put these goals away. I want to try something different. Take out a new sheet of paper and do this. Write down what you don't want in your life. List every major problem and source of discomfort you have. All your worries. All the negative things you can think of, even if they haven't come into reality yet. Even if they are just things you don't want to happen in the future. Take your time and be thorough. What I saw happen next startled me. The entire room's energy level picked up, and everyone in the workshop was writing and writing and writing. It wasn't long before some people asked if they could use a second page. Something strange and electric was filling the air as people aired their fears and grievances. Pages were flooded with ink, and hands and fingers had to be shaken out so people wouldn't cramp up from writing so much. When I called an end to the exercise, the room was buzzing. I had obviously let something loose that wasn't there before. At that moment I got my first true look at the power of the negative. Actually, I had seen it before. When I took the time to look back over my life, I realized that saying no was always a stronger stand to take than saying yes. Saying no is drawing a line in the sand. It is taking a stand. It is putting your foot down. It is passionate. It is powerful. Compared to saying no, saying yes is wobbly and wishy-washy. I said yes to 1,000 drinks of alcohol in my life. But it wasn't until one hungover suicidal morning when I said no that my life got completely turned around. When the caveman drew the line in the dirt outside his cave and said no to the saber-toothed tiger, his family was finally safe. Saying no is powerful, because it comes from the deepest part of the soul. There are some things we just won't tolerate. Once we fully understand the power of those no's deep inside of us, we can use them to motivate ourselves like never before. In the workshop I was telling you about, once the people filled their papers up with what they didn't want, we got busy converting problems into goals. You don't want to go bankrupt? Then let's get a prosperity plan going. You don't want to weigh as much as your two best friends combined? Then let's get a nutrition and exercise program going. Any no can be converted to a powerful yes. So if you're stuck without any truly motivating goals, dreams, or commitments, then go negative first. Figure out what you absolutely don't want, what you absolutely fear and dread and refuse to let into your life, then convert it to its opposite, positive form, and see what happens. You'll be more motivated than you ever dreamed you could be. I have used this in one-on-one meetings with people who wouldn't open up and tell me what they wanted. I simply asked them to tell me what they didn't want to have happen, and we were off to the races. Once you know what that is, you can convert the conversation to exciting plans and objectives. This explains why so many successful people had difficult upbringings, sometimes living in the harshest poverty. They connected very early to what they didn't want. The rest was clear sailing. The next time you lack passion when thinking of what you want, try turning it around. Ask yourself what you absolutely don't want, and then feel the energy building in you to overcome that problem. That energy you're feeling is the deepest and most primal form of motivation.